Hello and welcome to Larissa's Kitchen. On this show, we strive to be professional, but sometimes it all goes sideways. Like when we forget to film openers to specials that we filmed 5 months ago. Like today. In our first Thanksgiving special, I cook a full turkey dinner with all the trimmings. Now this may seem like a lot, but the prep work and cooking is spaced out over 3 days to minimize the amount of actual cooking you have to do on Thanksgiving Day, which when I was a kid seemed to start at 5 a.m., and that's just too early to start drinking. So let's see how I handled this back in July when I was still tan and it was 90 degrees outside. The turkey we need to start 2 days in advance. So if you're making this for Thanksgiving, this is Tuesday night. Now we're going to be brining this turkey for 2 days. This is a brine and not a marinade, so some of these ingredients are going to seem a bit excessive. For the brine, we're going to need 2 cups of soy sauce, 1½ cups of white granulated sugar, a whole cup of kosher salt, 2 vegetable bouillon cubes, a teaspoon of whole cloves, a tablespoon of whole allspice berries, and a tablespoon of whole peppercorns. Now we're going to be heating all of this and dissolving it in this saucepan. I know you're wondering what on earth this is doing here. And I know it says Cornish game hen briner. Well, we're going to be brining our turkey in it. It's a water cooler and it's perfect for this application. We'll be covering our turkey with both water and ice to keep it cold. And then this is just going to go down in my basement. Okay, I've got this on over medium-high heat. I'm going to be adding, I don't know, anywhere between 2 and 4 cups of water. We will need to eventually add enough water and ice to the briner so that it covers the whole turkey. We're just going to go ahead and heat this until all of the sugar and salt dissolves. We're letting this simmer rather than just waiting for the sugar and salt to dissolve, because we've also got to dissolve those bullion cubes. They're not going to dissolve until this is boiling. I'm organizing my work area before I even get started here. I've got my Cornish game hen briner with about 8 cups of ice and about 4 cups of water in it. Now that I'm sitting down on a bar stool just simply because I am so short and this is a much better angle for me. I'm going to let my brine cool just a little bit before I add it in here. I've got my cutting board sitting on just a few paper towels. This will help control the mess because there's going to be a lot of liquid in that turkey. I've got my boning knife, kitchen shears, and my poultry shears. I'm going to need all of these. I've also got my tray here for my scraps. This is where I'm going to put the thighs and all of the other components that we cut off. The wings, the drumsticks, and the deboned breast are going to be going in this brine. This turkey's been rinsed and I've patted it dry, both inside and out. Now, first thing we need to do is get rid of this stupid pop-up timer. That doesn't help us with anything. And I've also got a garbage can back here, so I'm not throwing stuff on the floor. Okay. The first thing we need to do is cut out this backbone. First, I'm actually going to get rid of the tail. This is also called the parson's nose. And this is why I have the kitchen shears, because the poultry shears wouldn't do this very well. Now to get this backbone out, I'm actually going to cut down the backbone first on either side with the knife. That'll give me a guide for the poultry shears to follow. This is a lot like deboning a chicken, but it's much bigger and much tougher. So we're actually going to dislocate the hip away from the backbone. It's much easier than trying to cut through this. And now through the ribs. Okay, now up the other side. Okay, all this is going on this tray. All right, next we're going to turn this over and take off the wings and the legs. Okay, for the wings, we're just going to go ahead and use the knife. We're going to start from the underarm and we're going to work our way to the top. Okay, so first we're going to cut through all the meat, and then we're going to dislocate the shoulder so that we don't go through the bone. Okay, and now we're just going to bring the knife up here and we're going to go through all these tendons. Okay, here's one wing, and this is now going in the briner. Okay, now the other wing. And now this into the brine. Okay, now the legs at the knees. This is going to be the same thing. We're going to cut through the leg from behind, right at the knee. Then we're going to cut across the knee at the top. Okay, and we're going to dislocate the joint. Okay, and then we're going to cut through all of these ligaments and tendons. Okay, this is now going in the briner. Next leg. Next come the thighs. We're going to take these off and simmer these for our broth and for our gravy. Okay, these go on the tray. This is going to be a brine turkey breast Thanksgiving dinner. The reason why I didn't just buy the turkey breast is because a turkey breast like this costs as much as the entire turkey. So it's a much better bargain to get the whole thing. Plus you never know who's going to want a turkey leg. Okay, now we just need to debone this turkey breast. Now we need the skin on, so we have to be careful when we get to the keel because there's no muscle between the bone and the skin, and we don't want to cut this in half here. This is tedious work and we're just going to have to do it. So we're going to start by separating the meat from this rib cage here. We're just going to trace down with this knife along the rib cage. Okay, and then you just have to feel with your fingers. Okay, there is cartilage and there's tendon here, and it will provide resistance for your knife, so you're usually not going to poke through this. And I'm sorry if you can't see this too well, but I do need to see what I'm doing. Okay, we're coming up to the actual keel bone, so I'm going to stick my fingers in here and separate the meat from the bone this way. Okay, and then also up the rib cage. And we have to be careful. We've got a wishbone in here that's actually this right here. So we have to get the breast meat off of this wishbone. It goes around both sides. So I'm gonna slice on this side of it here. Okay. Okay, and then use the knife to go down along this bone. Now there's a lot of tendons in here because there are a lot of different muscles to help this bird fly when it used to fly. So you have to cut through a lot of those, and that's going to be difficult too. We're also going to essentially be taking this breast meat off the bone by sliding it over. So we'll get our finger in here. We'll cut this tendon. This is actually what holds the tender to the rest of the rib cage. Okay. Okay, and then we'll slide it off this way. Okay, and then we can see we've got another tender holding it on here, or another tendon holding it on here. We cut through. Okay. Almost got half this peeled away here. Okay, and then just take the knife and work your way down along this, I don't know what bone this is, the collarbone I think it is. No, I think the collarbone is actually the wishbone. If you know turkey anatomy, leave a comment. Okay, here is the keel. This is what we have to be very careful removing the breast and the skin from. Okay, and this is actually going to be the last thing we remove it from. We'll start in on the other side here in a second. Okay, so we're just getting right down to the bottom. You can feel the resistance with your knife. Just carefully cut around that. Okay, I need to get this released from here. That is on that bone, the wishbone, so I got to cut that away. Okay, so I can feel the bottom of the wishbone. It's right here. Okay, so now we're going to have to go ahead and just release it from this side and then work our way up and start taking off the other side of the breast. Okay, so over here. Okay, we're coming down to the home stretch here. Here's the rib cage. This is all the meat. Here is the keel bone right here, and this is all that's left holding it on. So we have to be very careful because we need to follow along the keel bone and separate the keel bone from the underside of the skin without cutting through it. Okay, our rib cage is free. This is going on the pan too, on the tray. Okay, this looks like a mess, but we'll turn it right way out. And here's our turkey breast. Okay, this is going in the brine. All right, we need to be able to hold this down underneath the brine because we want everything covered. So we need something non-reactive. You could use a coffee cup, or I'm just using my shiny stainless steel half-cup measuring cup. It's just enough weight to push it all down and hold it in there. This is going downstairs in my basement for the 2 days for the brine to work. I will check it tomorrow morning to make sure that there's still ice in there. If it's running low, I'll probably drain just a little bit of the brine out and add maybe 2 or 3 cups of ice to it. We don't want to add too much ice because it will refreeze this turkey. That just leaves us with the pieces we aren't brining. I'm going to cover these with plastic wrap and refrigerate them tonight. Tomorrow morning I'm going to simmer them for about 3 hours. The broth we're going to use in the stuffing and for our gravy. It's the day before Thanksgiving, and now I need to take care of all this turkey that didn't go in the brine. I've got it here on this tray and it's seasoned. It's going to be going in this Dutch oven. I'm going to fry it just for a little bit to give it some color. Then it's going to come back out. We'll fry them individually. And then everything's going back in and it'll be covered with water. Then we're going to simmer it for close to 3 hours. Okay, that was about 3 tablespoons of canola oil. I'm going to do these thighs first. Okay, that's got some nice color. Normally you can't put cooked meat back on a tray with raw meat, but this really isn't cooked, and it's all going back in this pan anyway to simmer for another 2 hours. With water. Now this is filtered water because our water tastes a lot like chlorine, so I'm using filtered water here. We're going to cover it all the way, and then we're going to put the lid on, and we're going to let this simmer for 2.5 hours. We're not going to cover this right away. We're going to let it come to a simmer, then we'll turn it down, then we're going to cover it. Once this cools down enough for me to handle it, I'll separate the meat from the bones and strain the broth. It's the night before Thanksgiving. We're going to do 2 things to help us ease the workload tomorrow. We're going to put our rolls together first, and then we're also going to put our pumpkin crunch torte layers together. First, we're going to get started on the rolls because they're going to need to rise. So let's get started on the ingredients. We're starting with 2 cups of all-purpose flour in the bowl. To that, we're going to add 1/3 cup of vital wheat gluten, 1/3 cup of white granulated sugar, a teaspoon of kosher salt, and 1.5 packets of active dry yeast. That's probably about 1.5 tablespoons. We're going to mix those by hand with the paddle attachment. Then we're going to add our 2 cups of very warm milk. That's about 115 to 120 degrees. We're going to mix this by hand too. That way we don't have to worry about flour flying all over the place. Once it's incorporated, we'll stick it on the mixer. Okay, and we're going to mix this on low to begin with, and then probably on speed 3 out of 10. Okay, that was about 1.5 minutes. We're going to go ahead and run this on low. We're going to add in the butter. When the butter is all melted, we're going to add in these eggs one at a time. This is 1/2 stick of butter, and this is 2 large eggs. Okay, that looks good. We're going to go ahead and take this off, scrape down the sides, add our flour, and change over to the dough hook. I'm going to start with about 1.5 cups. Now we'll change over to the dough hook. Okay, let's talk for a minute about these rolls and bread in general. Less is more. That is, less flour is more. We want to use just enough flour to turn this dough into a soft ball that is just no longer sticky. So we're going to be adding our flour in 1/2 cup increments. Okay, also, we need to let the mixer run for about 2 minutes between each addition. just check this. Okay, it's very soft and it's not sticky. All right, we're gonna get this out of the bowl, over to the granite, roll it into a ball, and get it into a greased bowl for its rise. Okay, we don't want to add any extra flour to this because we don't want it to get too stiff. So you can see how soft this is. Okay, we're going to put it in the bowl, grease both sides, and we're going to let this rise. While we let the dough for the rolls rise, we're going to get started on these pumpkin crunch torte layers. Now, these layers are made in 2 layers each. We have a crunch layer on the bottom and then a cake batter layer on the top. Each one of these is going into an 8-inch cake pan. Now, I've pre-treated these with just a little bit of nonstick cooking spray, and they are already a nonstick cake pan. We're going to get started by making this crunch layer. That's 1½ cups of brown sugar, 1½ cups of Nilla wafer crumbs, 1½ cups of very finely crushed walnuts, and then 3/4 of a cup of melted butter. We're going to mix this together, divide it evenly amongst these 4 pans, and press it down in the bottom. To start this pumpkin cake batter, we need to cream together 1 1/4 cups of white sugar, 3/4 of a cup of soft butter, and 1/2 of a cup of plain yogurt. Okay, next we're going to add in this pumpkin. I've also got my oven preheating to 350 degrees. Okay, we're going to scrape down the sides and add in these eggs. Next we add 1 tablespoon of pumpkin pie spice, 2 1/4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon of kosher salt, and 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. Last, we're going to add in 2 1/2 cups of all-purpose flour, about a cup at a time. Alright, we don't want to overmix our batter because we don't want the flour to make this tough. We just need to divide this evenly between our 4 cake pans. We need to bake these for 20 minutes. While those cake layers are cooking, we're going to roll out our rolls. Now I've got my half-sheet pan here, just lightly sprayed with nonstick cooking spray. We're going to put all the rolls on there, and we're going to divide this dough into 24 pieces. So we're going to get it out on this counter, punch it down to redistribute the bubbles, cut it up, and shape it into our rolls. We're going to cover these and put these in the refrigerator overnight. I'm going to let these cool in the pan for about 10 minutes. After that, I'm going to turn them out onto a cooling rack, where they're going to stay until tomorrow for dessert. Because we've done a bunch of the time-consuming work beforehand, Thanksgiving dinner today is going to be much easier. Now, this morning when I got up, I took a package of French-cut green beans out of the freezer. These need to thaw for our green bean bake. It's about 4 hours before we're ready to eat, and I'm going to start roasting my sweet potatoes for my sweet potato ramekins. We'll get these in the oven and then turn it on to 350. We'll let them roast for about an hour and 20 minutes. I've got these sweet potatoes in a baking pan, and I've got this baking pan lined with a little bit of nonstick aluminum foil. That's because the sugars are going to bake out of here and make a sticky mess. I also haven't done anything with these potatoes. They haven't been peeled and they haven't been pricked. I also haven't preheated the oven. These are going to roast for about an hour and 20 minutes, and anything over an hour long, you don't need to preheat. So let's get these in the oven and get it going. From now until we're ready to eat, that oven's pretty much going to be running non-stop. Now we can do a few things while we're waiting for those potatoes to roast. I'm going to peel and cut up my russets for my mashed potatoes, and I'm going to start in on the stuffing. So let's get the potatoes peeled first. Once you've cut up your potatoes, they need to stay submerged in water or they will turn black. Now that these potatoes are cut up, we can get started on the stuffing. And for that, we need to dice one large white onion. This is a very large white onion, and in truth, we're only going to use half of it for our stuffing. The other half is going into a corn casserole. So we just need to dice this fine. We're going to be sweating down these onions in about 1 stick of butter. To that, we're going to be adding 1½ cups of very roughly chopped walnuts and 1 cup of craisins. We're doing all of this so soon in advance because this needs to come to room temperature before we can add it to the rest of the stuffing ingredients. We don't have to wait until this melts all the way. We can just go ahead and add the onion to it. We're going to sweat the onion down for about 3 or 4 minutes until it becomes soft and translucent. And we're going to season this with about 1 teaspoon of kosher salt and about a ½ teaspoon of fresh cracked black pepper. These are starting to get fragrant, so we can add the walnuts and the craisins. And we're going to let this saute for an additional 3 to 4 minutes. With the onion, walnut, and cranberry portion of our stuffing done, we can move on to some more prep work. I need to dice 2 bell peppers for my confetti corn casserole. I've also got some fresh herbs for this stuffing. This is 1 very large sprig of rosemary. I'm going to be peeling this and chopping it. This is several sprigs of thyme. I'm going to be stemming those. And then this is fresh rosemary. I'll probably use about 8 to 10 leaves of this. And this is going to be very finely chopped. It's easier to peel off these spices if you peel them backwards against the grain. They just come right off. And then we're going to chop this. Okay, so I've just stacked up all these leaves. I'm going to slice these very thinly. The insides I'm going to save for garnish. And this thyme works well too if you just peel it backwards. That worked out to about a tablespoon each of these fresh spices. We're also going to need about 3 tablespoons of dried parsley. This is that strained turkey stock. You can see this is nice and gelatinous, so I'm going to have to heat it up just a little bit. We're going to need 4 cups of it for the stuffing. The rest of it is going into a saucepan, and I'm going to reduce that for the gravy. Next, we're going to put together the green bean bake. Once that's together, it can go in its pan, and then that can just sit in the refrigerator until it's ready to go in the oven. For that, we're going to need our 1 package of thawed French cut green beans, 1 can of cream of chicken soup, 1½ cups or so of heavy whipping cream, and some salt and pepper to taste. Now we're just going to mix this all together until it's the right consistency, and then we're just going to go ahead and put it in the baking pan. It's about a ½ teaspoon of salt. Now we're going to mix this together first, and then we'll add the cream later. I'm going to start with about 1 cup of this cream. I don't want it to be too messy. And we're using cream instead of milk because the cream will thicken up when it's baked. The milk would not. Okay, this looks pretty good. We're going to go ahead and put it in the pan. And this is my 8 by 10.5 inch baking pan. For our stuffing, along with our onion mixture, our turkey stock, and our fresh and dried herbs, we're also going to need 14 ounces of unseasoned stuffing cubes. We'll need a can of cream of chicken soup and 2 eggs. We'll mix in all of our herbs and our onion mixture before we add the stock, the soup, and the eggs. I'm going to let this sit until we're ready to roast the turkey. Right beforehand, I'll check it to see if these stuffing cubes have enough moisture. Speaking of our turkey, it's time to get this out of the brine. Now, I'm going to take this over to the sink and actually drain a little bit before I stick my hands in there so I don't make too much of a mess. Okay, I just have this on a tray that's got paper towels to help absorb some of this moisture. Okay, the timer has gone off on these potatoes. I'm just going to give them a squeeze. Yes, they're all nice and done. Okay. These are soft, which means they're done. We're going to let them sit in their skins for about 15 to 20 minutes before we peel them. We're getting ready to roast this turkey, so I need to check the stuffing, A, to make sure it's plenty seasoned, and then also to make sure it's not too dry. Alright, so a little crunchy, so I am going to add a little bit extra milk, but the seasoning is perfect. Okay, I'm going to add about 2 cups of milk. We're going to have the benefits of stuffing without the problems of stuffing. We're actually going to put all this stuffing in the bottom of this pan and kind of shape it into a football shape. Then we're going to lay the turkey breast and the other turkey pieces on top of it. This turkey is only going to roast for about 1 hour and 45 minutes. That makes it much easier to plan your dinner time. So let's get it over into that hot oven. Have no fear, we're not done with that turkey yet. We're going to be making a glaze to put over top of it. That's going to be made with 18 ounces of apricot preserves, 1 stick of butter, that's half a cup, and 2 cups of white wine. Now this is drinking wine, but it is cheap. Just don't use cooking wine. We're going to be simmering it in this saucepan until it's nice and thick, and then it's going to be brushed on that turkey when there's a half an hour left to roast. We need to peel these potatoes while they're still pretty hot. Now, I like to use rubber gloves for peeling these potatoes. That's all I use them for is food. And that way then my hands are protected. We do need to be able to mash these with butter and salt and pepper, so we don't want them to be cold. Okay, I'm going to put in about a teaspoon, about half a teaspoon of kosher salt and some fresh cracked black pepper. Okay, and then I'm just going to mash these with a potato masher. I've solved the classic sweet potato casserole crisis of everyone wanting the roasted marshmallows by serving them in their individual ramekins. So all we have to do is scoop in the potatoes and top each with marshmallows. And if we use mini marshmallows, we can get more on there. I've got the turkey stock on high so we can reduce for its gravy. If you can believe it, we've got about 45 minutes before we have to worry about doing anything else. Now, I've been making this meal all by myself. My camera woman is helping me do dishes in between takes, so clearly one person can do it. But if you've got just one additional competent helper, this meal will go together without any problems. I'm going to pour all of this glaze on the turkey. The breast, the wings, and the legs. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's very good on the stuffing. Alright, and this is going back in the oven for 30 more minutes. We've got about 30 minutes left on that turkey, so now's a good time to explain the last two things that we'll be making. All of this is for a corn casserole. This is 1 pound of corn kernels. Now these are frozen, you could use thawed. We've got our bell peppers and our onions from before. We've got 8 ounces of cream cheese, a half a pound of bacon diced, and a half teaspoon each of kosher salt, black pepper, and cayenne pepper. Also 1 tablespoon of granulated sugar. The last thing we're going to be putting together, and it is the only thing that's last moment, will be our Waldorf salad. Waldorf salad is just sliced apples, sliced celery, chopped walnuts, and a mayonnaise sauce. The mayonnaise sauce is just mayonnaise, whipped cream, and a little bit of sugar. That's going to have to go together right before we serve it. There's about 5 minutes left on that turkey. When it comes out, a few things are going to happen pretty quickly. This green bean bake and those sweet potato cassolettes are going to go in the oven to bake for 30 minutes. The rolls are going to come out of the refrigerator and sit on the countertop to come to room temperature. This is our gravy. Well, it's not really gravy, it's actually demi-glace. That's a concentrated turkey stock. We're going to use it very sparingly because it's got a lot of flavor. Because these rolls have been proofing in the refrigerator overnight, they're going to have a nice chewy texture and a rich yeasty flavor. This turkey has just come out of the oven and now things are going to get just a little bit hairy. The russet potatoes are started for the mashed potatoes, and as soon as I move this turkey out of the way, I got to get started on that corn casserole. The first thing we need to do is brown this bacon. Once it's done, we're going to go ahead and remove that from the pan, but leave the grease in it. Then we're going to saute the corn, the peppers, and the onions. These vegetables have been in here for about 2 minutes. They're just starting to soften, so now we can add the corn. These onions are starting to look translucent, so we can go ahead and add our spices. The salt, the pepper, cayenne, and the sugar. Last in goes the cream cheese and a half of a cup of half and half, which I forgot to mention. We're going to stir this and let it simmer until all of this cheese is melted, and then we're going to continue to allow it to simmer for about 10 minutes. These potatoes just started boiling, so we need to keep an eye on them. When they're fork tender, we'll drain them, leave them in their pan, and return them to the stovetop to completely dry. Of course, we're adding French fried toppings to this green bean bake. It's then going back in the oven for 15 minutes. Okay, we're adding half of a stick of butter to our potatoes, and we're going to let that melt while they continue to dry. This confetti corn casserole is done. We just need to get it into its casserole dish and then top it with this bacon. These rolls are going in the oven. I've turned the temperature up to 375, and they're going to bake for 18 minutes. Okay, we're also going to add about a half of a teaspoon of kosher salt and a half teaspoon of fresh cracked black pepper. And then I'm going to mash these by hand. Now I'm going to add about a cup of buttermilk, maybe a little bit more, until this reaches the right consistency. To make this Waldorf salad, we need 2 apples that are crunchy and tart. Now I've got a Granny Smith and an Empire. Both these flavors are good. We're also going to need 2 stalks of celery. These need to be diced. We need to core and dice these apples. We also need to rough chop about 1 cup of walnuts. And I'm just going to brush these with some very soft butter. The sauce for this Waldorf salad is the last thing we'll need to make. This is 1/3 cup of sugar. I'll need about 1 cup of mayonnaise and probably close to 1/2 cup of whipped cream. That's just to make the sauce lighter. It's time to get our Thanksgiving plate put together. This turkey has been sitting on the countertop for a better part of an hour, and it is still hot. I better leave room for dessert. All we've got left is to assemble this dessert. And because we did all the hard part yesterday, all we have left to do is to whip some sweetened whipped cream to put between the layers. For that, we're going to need 2 cups of heavy whipping cream and 1/4 cup of powdered sugar. We're going to beat that on high until it stiff peaks. These I stacked on the dessert plate I was going to use. Now I've got them all separated with plastic wrap, that way the layers don't stick together. We're just going to divide this into thirds, spread it in between each layer, stack them up, and then the top we're going to top with dollops from the cream whipper. It's a delicious ending to a long and wonderful day. He's still draining.